So my name is Natasa Milic-Frayling, and I am a founder of Digital. I have a long track experience with digital preservation, and coming to this conference in person, it was a fantastic opportunity to meet up with my colleagues. I was involved in Planets and a European project, and then Scape. And what I noticed in our conversation these days, whenever we think about what we've done in the past, it was almost like, oh, that was 8 years ago. No, 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And I realized when I'm presenting our work today, I really have to be cognizant. I will be talking about something that was around 30 years ago, scary to think about. And it is a really popular movement. It was about internet art. And what you saw with Dragan and Rhizome is really trying hard to preserve this for the future generation. For many young professionals here, this is not something to remember, it's something new. For me, this is still memory, and I have to kind of remember that I have to explain, just like to my kids, I have to explain that there was something, a 3D visualization even 30 years ago, as opposed to this cool AI game engine that they play now. So just referring to Rhizome, when I was looking for how to define internet art, because again, this was something that happened in the 1990s. So I actually went to Rhizome to find how people at that time saw internet art. And it's really fascinating. This is actually art piece. This describe what the mission was for artists at that time, internet art. And they also have this static, instead of this having this digital slate, you can read the text. So I was amazed because this is not just about creativity. It was a movement. It was a liberation. It was freedom for people to now use internet to reach out to audiences, to be heard, to interact, to engage. You can imagine what that offered to creatives, to artists who suddenly were not restricted by having to have a space to pay for or bring the audience for a little bit of time to see their work. It was there all the time. And I really liked what was also said here in one small section, what internet for them was. It was really the publishing platform, it was the communication platform. Really, in one medium, they have seen multiple aspects of, say, publications and interaction with the audiences. So I see this almost as an activism rather than just art. Now, what we try to investigate, what was it that actually made this art? What were the components that they used? And the case study that I will be talking to you about is with the artist, Takeo Magruder, who was very advanced, technically extremely advanced, in combining technologies that were available at the time. So one component is virtual reality modeling language. Imagine that you can use this language to describe, in text, you can describe how the virtual environment should look like. And then, by the way, these slides are not for reading. We're talking. I put some background information for people to read afterwards, so I don't expect anybody to actually read. It's just for context. I thought if people later need to find out where information is, I can just offer. So it was the first time that artists could become technical. They can engage in the describing what they wanted in a relatively accessible way. And then the description, the 3D models are then interpreted with these viewers, VMRL viewers. And one particular viewer that was used at the time was Cortana 3D. And this is something that still lives. So this is now, again, connecting the past and the present. You can still find readers, you can start players for this type of formats. But yet, there is lots of memory, lots of stuff going back. Besides the VMRL, of course, there is a carrier of all this, is the internet browser. And even now, we are aware what it means. Internet browser and the competition for who gets there and who actually owns the experience of user in the internet is still going on. But in the whole history here, I outlined a little bit. In 1990s, we had the first one, the first browser, which was actually called World Wide Web, and then renamed it to Nexus, so that not confuse us with the resources. The history of a browser primarily is history of competition, because a browser is the ultimate client. It's the way we experience the distributed web content. And the ones that are going to be relevant for this discussion was Internet Explorer, because you may remember, some of you remember, a Netscape navigator was extremely popular, and then Microsoft came with Internet Explorer. Microsoft also paid the price because they bundled it with other stuff. So there was a really turf war for getting the browser in front of people. It is very important because browsers was becoming more and more extendable, which meant that the browser can become a carrier for lots of ways of representing a content. And now we come to the final one, and this is the reason why we're actually talking. I'm talking about this use case, and that's the Adobe Flash. Really starting as first as a Macromedia Flash and then Future Flash, it has its history towards very prevalent use in creating rich user experiences through dynamic content. It was used in many areas, especially in education, and artists use it, of course, in creating creative arts. But of course, then came the bad news. The bad news came in December 2020, when Adobe declared that this was the last release of the Flash player, and the Flash player was the one that would present the creative content. Speaking to artists, there was also anger because this practically disabled this easy access to the content, because the Flash player was within the browser. So once you have this environment, you can really very easily access the creative artifacts. With that gone, and not only just gone in a sense of no support, it was also actively being removed because it did present security risks. So this was not a joke. This is basically, if you're running it, you in fact can affect the whole environment within which this is running. And while many, of course, may be thinking that Adobe was very harsh on this, you can imagine any organization that would be related to any security breaches and cyber attacks would not be in a very good position. So I can understand why they were so strict in the way they handled it. However, that doesn't help the artists and everybody else who is affected. But that was basically the main purpose of thinking, what are the ways to still enable this, knowing that there is an issue with security? Are there still ways that we can experience art online in as close form as possible, as originally possible? So Michael and our team, Intact Digital team, the technical team, person on our side, it was Morgan, and myself, three of us were discussing what can be done about this. Michael has a very extensive work that involves art over 20 years. And without Flash, that would really affect many of his digital art. So what I would like to just quickly switch in and show you how Michael actually is maintaining his archive. So let me just actually go to the browser so you can see. So this is very excellent example where you have a private archive. Archive is maintained by the artist. So artist is curating it. So sort of links to our discussions at iPres about private archives or community archives and so on. So this is very well maintained, and the piece of work that is of particular interest is the one that's called World. And this is the piece that, if you click and get more details, is really elaborate 3D sculpture that is dynamic, and is of course defined in the VMRL, but uses the textures from Flash. So if you don't have Flash, then you don't have any of these effects. I will leave it to you to read, in fact, the description of how it's done. I just thought it was a fantastic idea. And the word world has been translated in many languages, a number of languages, and then digital representation of it was turned into visual. And not only visual, but also in the sound. So the star actually has these sculptures, and each sculpture originates from the word world in a specific language. It can be Chinese, French, German, but aesthetically it becomes an extremely elaborate geometrical and also auditory experience. So if you browse down and after you read it, there are some still images here that preserve elements of these structures. And then normally you would click here and you would be able to see them. Yeah, but that's the problem. And now because of that there is no plugin, so his whole collection now ends up here. You know, we were seen before by the web archive. You go further down, yeah, and you're ready for this experience, and then there is nothing. So I will now show you how we reconstructed it, and then later I will just explain the process, just so you can see how it actually looks. So a little bit about Digital. Digital is a company that actually works on environments, computing environments. So similarly to you have heard about computational access. So we are all about the computational access because digital requires computational access. The second thing you heard about virtualization. We don't talk about virtualization. Virtualization we use if it is necessary to use it. We really talk about installation of the software that would then perform the object. In the previous presentation, you heard Dragan using the term performance. Yes, indeed, it is all about, digital is all about performance. And so when we think about this, the environment in which you have to run it, perform it, experience it, we think about this as an instrument. I like you to think about analogy of music. You have a score, and then you need an instrument to play it. Similarly, with digital scripts are there, everything is there, but then you need a player, and you need the environment where to play it. So I'm going to show you now a software library. This is a place where we have lots of stuff, that environments where we play things. And some of them are virtualized, some of them are just real machines running with operating systems that are contemporary. So that's what I'm basically saying. We heard lots about promoting emulation and fantastic presentations by about easy, and also we have lots of preservation solutions now embedding readers inside and so on. This is sort of a slightly different approach, thinking that when you have unique artifacts, you have environment where it plays. So I'm going to log in, and in this environment, this is my software library, where I have multiple of these things I can play with. So one I'm going to show you first is this Cortana 3D, because this is the player that we're going to use. And it's going to activate environment where I will be able to activate everything that I need to play Michael's piece. So this is now Cortana 3D viewer. This is particular version 7.0, and now we can see the structure. So this is how it looks in real, not in still images. And then I had to learn, of course, how to play this instrument, because there are some interactive features here. So I can also zoom in and out. These are all features of the viewer. So if I want to say go to somewhere, I can just click, and then it zooms in and it shows me the sculpture. You can also hear the sound, because when the geometric structures were digitized, then they were also turned into audio. The interaction with this is quite amazing. So each of these cubes that you see as a sculpture, when I click on one of them, then you come to a different environment where that sculpture itself has been multiplied, rotated, integrated in a new, very complex structure. So if I say go here, click inside, this transition now into a new structure that has its own complexity. And you can hear the sound, you can interact with this. What I like, the still images that you saw on the website, they come very, very nicely in the beautiful colors, and it's absolutely mesmerizing. I can just stare at it, and I can go and browse through it, because each of them is so different and so special, and it's very, very engaging. And all of this is gone because there is no flash player. I will now close this one and go back to the slides. I will close it because otherwise we're going to hear the noise. Okay. So the objective really here was to reconstruct the art from the digital assets that the artist has. It's also important to emphasize that artists not only has the digital archive, but also has all PCs in his art studio that practically are reference installations of the art. Now, what we wanted to do is understand a little bit what is the procedure, just about Dragan was saying before in the presentation. How do you assess and what is the procedure of installation, and also how do you reason about the quality of what you've done? In contrast, what you heard with the Dragan explanation of performance and object, really artists are talking about experience. So this is a big difference in a sense, because even when somebody is evaluating it, whether this is a professional digital preservation specialist, still is a human experience in relation to whatever is being presented. Another thing I want to say, we are reasoning about this within the framework that we introduced last year at iPres, and this is what we call executable archive. And I can best explain it like this. The archive that Michael has, this e-archive, say, has all the assets. But in the environments that are required for this to be instantiated are sitting in the software library. Now, together, e-archive plus the software library make this executable archive, yeah? Because then everything that's, then the whole archive is aligned with the players, yeah? And then, as I could show you, with my example, then I can go into this environment from any laptop or any other device that enables me to use browser. I can enter the software library, and I can see artifacts. The artifacts need not stay in the software library. The artifacts can stay in the library, and they're just brought into the environment to play. What I showed you was installation that already had the content with it, because it was just a one single artifact. But if you have something where you're really concerned about resources and you want to keep things in cold storage and you pull it out whenever you want, then you can handle it that way. So this is an executable archive as kind of experience and conceptually do it. But let me now reflect what is the work behind. So our company works across sectors. So we have a lot to do with scientific data preservation, in particular in life sciences. And there, the reconstruction is the norm. So if you have an instrument and you're reading data from the experiments, you have to put this data into archive, and normally referred to as raw data. And raw data is then absolutely critical to reproduce the analysis. So reconstruction is the must, and it's actually dictated by the regulations. You have to keep the raw data for 20, 30 years, and imagine everything that was done with the COVID these days was done on Windows 10. That needs to be kept for 30, 50, 80, maybe even more years, because we still need to know what happened to our DNA, RNA, and all the experiments. Yet after 3 years, in 2025, there will be no support for Windows 10. So on that journey of 30, 40 years, you have to think about the reconstruction of stuff within environments that need to be preserved, the players. So normally, when you have this data, people immediately think, oh, what is my infrastructure, where I'm going to run it? And so yes, I showed you there is the infrastructure where you can keep the software running. There is also storage of software. In the software library, we have a digital vault where we put this stuff. And most importantly, there was this interactive layer. There was a virtual desktop that I showed you. So that often is ignored, but I just want to say this is still infrastructure. What's more important, actually, is what's on top of it. It is the services that maintain all of this. Yeah? And that's not talked about often. Of course, we talked about the rhizome, we saw it. How much work is behind running rhizome and taking care of? The same thing with software library. There are procedures for maintaining it, but there are also procedures for using it. So for the process that is important here, I just want to say in life sciences, there are very, very precise guidance what it means data integrity, and also what is meant by software integrity. So both of them are extremely well aligned. What we have in digital preservation, in a more general sense, often we don't have such a very prescriptive way, and that's why discussions with the artists were absolutely critical. And it's not just about validating the software, it is the interaction between the software and the content. So what we've done first, we spoke with Michael and said, okay, Michael, what do you do with your art? How do you maintain this? And what we realized is that even during the lifetime, the prime time of the art, Michael was changing things, because every time there would be new exhibition, the environments may be slightly different, and therefore you had to adjust things in order to accommodate changes to get a similar experience. And it was all based on this intuitive, sort of assumed and often implied notion of authenticity. The second thing was that Michael absolutely didn't want just to talk about preservation. Really, he had one. He has a reference installation in his art studio. But the thing needs to live, and therefore it needs to be presented and accessible. So access is absolutely critical as a part of the construction process. And then the final thing was a bit about what does it mean to reproduce the user experience? And so can we have this notion of, just like we had data integrity and soft integrity, do we have a notion of artward integrity? And in conversations, after we looked at all the aspects, we realized that four main issues that artists was primarily concerned about. One was quality, and this is basically what we talk about, integrity in a way. But equally so, the stability. So the stability of the installations that we have over time, so that we don't have to change too much, and change experience as well. Longevity was key in the sense that the longevity is about managing licenses, managing access points, so interaction with the environment that is a contemporary environment. And access, of course, is being able to deliver this economically, sustainably to the masses again. So the reconstruction process really was focused on these four things. Yeah? And after reconstruction is done, the access was the key. So what I will now show quickly, two phases. In the reconstruction process, we had the first phase, feasibility, just to see what we're dealing with. And then second part was focusing on access. And the reason I'm showing you this is because the access, in fact, made us go back and have to redo things in order to provide it. So initially, we started the specifications, not expected to read, but this is exactly what is the software, what's the hardware, which installation of Internet Explorer are we going to have, which installation of Cortana are we going to have, which installation of Flash we're going to have. So similarly, what Dragan was showing, there's so much work involved when you have multiple components. And this is kind of a picture of it. Hardware had to have a GPU because that required the interactivity. Then we have a browser and operating system, and then we have three things on top to worry about. And you can imagine, we immediately found that there are interactions between these components. One also known problem was, if you resize the window, you're going to lose the texture. So you can't even resize the window. That's how fragile things can be. The second thing was, if you wanted to assess the quality, you really have to think about the performance qualification from the perspective of the access. So let me just quickly show this. These are the variabilities that we could have between four components. We had to find the configuration that fits four criteria. So for the Cortana, I just want to shorten this, there were two versions, 5.0 and 7.0. The 5.0 was the one that artists really optimized their art for. But the problem was that it was interaction between that and the remote access that made the problem. So this is the picture of it. When we picked 5.0 version, unfortunately, because we're using this Microsoft Server operating system to provide lots of access, it wouldn't run with the virtual desktop. So the GP unit was not activated. Okay? So you would not expect, if you're just thinking about Cortana 3D, okay, that's my software, I can view it. But when you think about access and access at scale, and then you have interaction like this that can throw you completely off. So in short, we solved this problem by replacing Cortana 5.0 with Cortana 7.0. And then everything worked beautifully. So what I showed you was 7.0. However, what I didn't tell you is that when we were talking about final configuration with Michael, we said, okay, so tell us honestly, what is the compromise that you made? So we went from 5.0 to 7.0. And there was a little bit of a flicker. So when these sculptures go around, then you can see a little bit of a flicker. And of course, Michael would know it, and we actually compare two installations, and it is visible. However, Michael said, I am all for the access. I give it to the people, and I will take care of the Flickr later. Yeah. Thank you.
That was a lot of complexity to put into it, so that was really, really fascinating. Thank you. So we've got 10 minutes for Q&A. Does anyone have any questions from the audience? Yes.
Your example with Flash, I mean, the demise of Flash has been a challenge for lots of people, also in education, which relied on it. With the artist example, do you see any parallels with today's artists who are experimenting with NFTs and these non-fungible tokens? Is there going to be a similar challenge in the future to ensure that they're still sort of viewable or performable, to use your term?
So let me not talk about NFTs, but let me talk about other example. For example, I know about the work that was done in Australia to preserve the memories of the stolen generation, and they're using virtual environments, especially using game engines to do simulation of the environments. So all of that is coming, and it will be as a documentary heritage that is being created, needs to be maintained. I'm optimistic in the sense that just like we found ways to run this, we will, if we start right now, and if we are on time, so that we can make sure that we can compare things with the reference points, we can develop methods. I would just want to say there was no emulation involved here. This was really just protected environment in which we run things so that users are not exposed to cyber attacks. Yeah? So we are not talking about legacy here necessarily. Yes, there are components that are legacy, like Cortana 3D, and there is a Flash that was moved from the market. But that doesn't mean they don't work. Software ages slightly differently from us. There are no wrinkles, there are no things like that. The only reason why it doesn't run is because it's not updated, and therefore you cannot put it out there. It's not part of the contemporary environment. But it doesn't mean that we can't run in a protective way old environments.
Okay, thank you.
Richard Lehane from the International Atomic Energy Agency. Natasha, you mentioned how access was important to the artist. That was one of the elements they were that was one of their concerns. How does public access work with this model? Do viewers of the artwork get credentials to log into this environment to view it? Is that how it would work?
You can control it in any way you want. What I showed you is the environment that is protected by password. For other, say, clients that we have in pharma, it is super duper authentication 2-3 times more over. So I just want to say, it all depends on the context. The sustainability model or business model around this really depends on the artist, because one thing that's absolutely clear here is that we have a way to make art live and continue to be used, which actually wasn't the case. If you think about obsolescence, the art is so hard affected by the obsolescence that there is absolutely no chance for appreciation because you can't see it. You can have some surrogate of it. You can have a video, you can have an image of it, but not it. And so this is just showing that you can encapsulate it, you can control access if you wish to, or you can have open access. The only question is going to be who is going to pay for resources that are running it. I mean, even if you have a website, somebody is paying for the website. Of course, the costs are hidden. I personally see this more as an enabler. If somebody wants to view the art, and there's an exhibition, the artist can control it.
Any other questions? There in the back.
Hi, Natasa. That was great. I was wondering, what other applications are you envisaging for this platform, other than ours? have you considered other kinds of interactive content, things like video games or things that currently rely on emulation environments?
Yeah. So in this environment, we actually have multiple kind of emulated, we call them virtualization, basically. So it is a virtualized environment like XP, Windows 7, and so on. So, and the main context of use for software library has been in the pharma sector, and because they have really strict audit requirements. So auditor can come and say, I want to see something from 2003, show me. And then show me often is, okay, here's the file from my archive, and here's a checksum, everything works fine, but where is the software? And then if they're lucky, then there is a newer version of the software, so that claims to be a software, backward compatible, so they can open it in that. But backward compatibility is not always guaranteed. The second thing is often they stop using a particular vendor, so they don't even have that later version anymore, so they're already trapped into this legacy world. So that's where it's used primarily. But in principle, the same message that goes with digital art, the instrument is going to evolve. We are now, these days, we are playing Mozart and Bach and Beethoven on a modern piano. So this is the modern instrument. And what you saw is a combination of a legacy software, Cortana, older version, but also modern software. So the server was Microsoft Server 2019, and remote desktop was Citrix, latest version of Citrix. So that environment, that sort of instrument, is a combination of the two, and that's why one has to have a continual maintenance of this environment. It's not one-off preservation. It is constant monitoring and assessing for the modern components what need to be fixed and for all the components to be kept.
I have a follow-up question on that, which I was also considering. So you mentioned software. How do you deal with proprietary software? So some of these software platforms are attached to licenses. So how exactly do you deal with that?
So the software license installed in the software library doesn't belong to Intact Digital. It is the clients. And they normally talk to vendors, and vendors, because they want to be kind, and also they know they are not solving the problem, they are causing the problem, they normally say, yes, you're fine, this is perpetual license, just keep it. That's not the case with other elements. As you know, I mean, Microsoft has its own licensing agreements, so it's not surprising that we're using Microsoft Server 2019. Because this is, if you remember, one of the criteria was longevity. So we look at the licensing pathway and installing the latest one that gives you the longest sort of run until you have to rethink. Yeah.
Hi, that was a really great, really interesting talk. Apologies in advance, I don't even know if you can answer this question, but I think I'm a little bit confused about, is this a tool purely for artists for their own personal archives, and then if they wanted to do an independent exhibition, they can make this stuff viewable? What if a place like, say, like Tate or MoMA that actually is a repository for internet art increasingly these days and other time-based media, would they just gain access to the library? Would they accession the library? How does that dynamic work?
So normally there is a content holder. So this is an organization that has content, and then a software library is complementary to that. So it's a discussion, what is the software required? In pharma, it's really precise. You run this instrument for 10 years, and these are the versions you need. And they're really coupled very well. So they are very well aligned. So if it comes to general repository of content, it will be really finding which software is required. And then it's up to the data holder to decide who to give access. And the good thing is that the data holder can control it. So if you want to have a scholarly desktop just for the scholars, if you want to have something for kids, they want to play games, you can set up the access control, and so that you're fully aware of what's going on. And also we have full accountability. If for example, if you have to report to a vendor that you're using certain software, we know exactly what was used for how long and if they ever want to ask. So in general, this is not for the artist, this is very generic. And it could be customized for any content that the software can be hosted.
Thank you.
I think we've got 2 minutes, so we have a very quick question, or otherwise, I just want to say thank you to all the presenters, to
Thank
Natasha,
you for listening.
to Anita, Sarah, Martin, and Dragon.